Belinda, would you please proceed with the announcement?
Yes, most certainly. Good evening, everyone. We are going to be using the Zoom interpreter function for this meeting. So in just a moment, you're going to see a globe at the bottom of your screen, right next to where you see participants and chat. When you see the globe, you need to click on it and choose the language in which you want to participate. If you don't see the globe, please let us know, but it is important that you choose a language, otherwise you will not be heard. Vamos a utilizar el canal de interpretación de Zoom durante esta reunión y en un momento van a ver un globito que va a aparecer en la parte inferior de su pantalla al lado de donde están los iconos del chat y de los participantes. Cuando vean ese globo, necesito por favor que le hagan clic y que elijan el idioma en el cual quieren participar. Si quieren participar en español, obviamente pues seleccionan el español. Si no pueden ver el globo, por favor nos avisan. And that is our announcement. Thank you, Kush, for allowing me the opportunity.
Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. If you are just joining us, as a reminder, there is a Spanish translation option available. Please browse down to the globe option on the bottom of the screen and select either English or Spanish. Welcome to the website project update brought to you by Wipp. Our main speaker this afternoon is DOE Carlsbad Field Office Manager Reinhard Kemp.
Hi, welcome. Glad you're all able to attend this evening. This is our first project update in more than 1.5 years. I look forward to providing you quite a bit of information about the progress we've been making, and look forward to being able to answer any questions you might have regarding our progress. So if we can go ahead and go to the first slide, I'd appreciate that. Okay, so let's talk about our accomplishments over the last year or so. Given the pandemic and the large spikes that we've had of COVID-19 in the community, we take a look back at this year as a very large success. We've had 199 shipments this last year, including a significant number from Los Alamos National Laboratory. We shipped over 200,000 loaded miles. We've completed mining in panel 8. We've completed work on the structure of the salt reduction building for our new ventilation facility. We've also been able to balance the underground airflow in preparation for the 700C legacy fan restart activities. We've completed monitoring room upgrades, and we recently received approval from New Mexico to allow us to begin resuming work for shaft number 5, or our utility shaft. So let's talk a little bit about some of our upcoming shipments. If you can go ahead to the next slide, please. So we've taken a look at what the complex needs from a shipping capability over the next decade, and we've aligned it to our projected capabilities. As you'll see here, we do project a ramp up to 17 shipments per week on average. That's roughly 680 shipments in a year. Those shipments will continue to be prioritized from Los Alamos National Laboratory as well as Idaho, and they will be that way for the bulk of this decade. When you take a look at the shipping projection we had for this year, we were originally projecting roughly 258 shipments. As I indicated earlier, we made 199. Although it is not what our target was, it was still a very successful year for us given COVID-19. Now, the ramp up to 17 shipments is something we plan on doing prior to the new filtered ventilation systems coming online. That's what we refer to as the safety significant confinement ventilation system that's paired with our new utility shaft. Those are expected to come online in the 2025, 2026 timeframe. And so we believe we're going to be ready to resume increased shipments well before that. So what do we need to do to achieve those shipping goals? Go to the next slide, please. First, as you can tell from this graphic, it's a very complicated process for us to be ready to place waste in the underground. In order to ramp up our shipments, that obviously has a direct impact on what panels, or essentially our placement areas in the underground are. And so in order to make that happen, we need to have a variety of regulatory approvals in place. So as we are moving forward in that direction, we've done the process to get to the regulatory approvals for panels 11 and 12. So these are panels that come directly after panel 8. We have to make sure that we are mining to the west, which includes our access drifts, as well as mining out the panels themselves. We have to make sure that we have adequate ventilation in the underground. Additionally, we need to make sure that we have enough staff on site to be able to support not only the mining needs that we have, but also the waste and placement needs as well. So NWP, our contractor, is currently planning on implementing a 4th shift to be able to support our waste and placement as well as our mining needs. And then eventually we will need to transition to the new filtered ventilation system. And so all of these activities are ongoing in one form or another today, and will continue to do so over the next several years. Any work activities that are associated beyond panel 12, those still need to go through the regulatory decision-making process. We do anticipate beginning some Nepa analysis work here in the immediate future, which will help us get stakeholder input to make decisions regarding that future. Now, as we ramp back up to the 17 shipments per week, this obviously has resulted in renewed interest in transportation safety. So if we go ahead to the next slide. We have safely delivered transuranic waste to Wipp for more than 20 years from all across the United States. Here you can see a map of the current transportation routes shown in blue and green, as well as some of the routes that we no longer use. Now, with New Mexico as Wipp's host state, it's especially important that we communicate with our stakeholders in New Mexico to ensure that we are safely transporting waste. So when we take a look at the transportation routes going through New Mexico, one of the routes goes around Santa Fe. We use a bypass that was installed several decades ago, and only transuranic waste from Los Alamos goes around Santa Fe. Now, with regard to Carlsbad, you can see in the cutout that we have there that waste comes in primarily from the north and the west. Waste that's coming in from the north also bypasses around Carlsbad, and I believe there is also a bypass in Roswell as well, so that we do not ship waste through high population centers. Our shipments from the eastern part of the nation come in from the east. Currently, we are not shipping waste up from the south through Carlsbad. Next slide, please. So now that we understand the transportation routes, let's focus on why we have one of the safest transportation systems in the nation, if not in the world. This starts off with our shipping packages. So our shipping packages, which are type B shipping packages, are they undergo a very rigorous design and testing process. These individual packages are independently reviewed and approved by the NRC. And as you can see, they undergo a series of tests, including 2 different types of drop tests, a burn test, and then an immersion test, all of which have to occur concurrently and be able to demonstrate that the payload inside of these overpacks are not, do not result in a release of any kind of material. As I've indicated, we have several different packages that we do use: the TruePack 2, the TruePack 3, the half pack, and the 72B casks. Each of them has successfully demonstrated that they are able to meet the robust standards associated with our shipping packages. Next slide, please. Next, let's talk about our drivers. We have some of the best qualified drivers in the nation. We look at not only their professional record, but also what their private driving record is. As you can see, they have to have at least 325,000 miles in the last 5 years that have been driven safely, and more than 100,000 per year in the last 5 years, in 2 of the 5 years. Must not have repeated chargeable incidents, undergo a safety and background check, and must be US citizens. Next slide, please. All of our shipments are tracked. We have round-the-clock monitoring at Wipp. We have real-time monitoring capabilities that have been established not only with the states and tribal nations, but we also are in routine communication with the states and tribal nations to make sure we're effectively communicating where our transports are. We also are able to routinely communicate with our drivers. And so we are well up to speed and know any conditions that the drivers are seeing, such as weather or traffic patterns, and are able to track that very closely. Next slide, please. We, in conjunction with our state partners, also ensure that there are routine inspections of shipments prior to departure from the DOE sites. Each of our packages or each of our shipments needs to go through a level 6 inspection, which means it's 100% defect free. Simple things such as a running light must be working. Every single one on the conveyance. Now, we also have 2 drivers per shipment, and those drivers, after the first 50 miles, will pull over and conduct their own inspection of the vehicle. And additionally, they then stop every 3 hours or 150 miles to make sure that there's been no changes to the condition of the tractor or the trailer. We do not allow shipments to travel during weather warnings. And New Mexico also conducts shipments when we have our shipments entering the state, and they will do either a level 3 or a level 4 inspection. Next slide, please. Now, we also are very much involved in our in the emergency response capabilities of the communities along the route. Wipp funds and provides specialized training. Here you can see some of the training we provide. We also fund specialized equipment needs. New Mexico alone receives approximately $1.3 million a year to support the training and equipment needs to make sure that our first responders are along the routes are prepared in the event that we have an accident. Next slide. Now, the results speak for themselves. We've had over 13,000 shipments received. We've traveled 15.5 million loaded miles safely, and that's an average of 5 to 7 shipments per week. and we've consistently and safely shipped from Los Alamos, Idaho, and Savannah River. Now that we've talked about the number of shipments we plan on doing and how to get the waste safely to Wipp, let's talk waste emplacement. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So as a reminder, we put waste into rooms, and each panel that we have consists of 7 rooms. Each panel can hold roughly 2 to 3 football fields of waste stacked 3 drums high. Currently, we are emplacing waste in panel 7, and we're finishing up emplacement in room 2. Now, we expect to have this panel completely filled sometime this summer, and are moving forward in that direction. Now, that means we're going to have our next panel ready to go. So let's go to the next slide. Panel 8, we completed the mining activities at the end of September and are currently undergoing the outfitting. Outfitting includes installing communication lines, electrical lines, etc. We also have submitted a permit modification to New Mexico, and we'll be working with them for that. And we anticipate being ready to receive waste as early as the end of April. Now, because getting a panel ready to go takes quite a bit of time, we need to begin mining several years in advance. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So what this means is for panel 11, and we will need that panel roughly in 4 years from now, we will need to begin mining the access drifts or the roadways in the underground to be able to access the areas where those panels will be. So we have begun some of the mining activities to the west for those access drifts. Now this is intermittent mining work, but we did go ahead and get that started. We are also spending some time widening one of the access drifts leading into panel 8. And we are also widening some of the access drifts along the route that will go to the west. We will do this to make sure that we can safely move our equipment and materials in the underground, especially as we're hauling salt out of the areas of the underground that we have just mined. Next slide, please. The next topic, which has actually been of interest for the last several years, is ventilation. So air really is the lifeblood of the Wipp underground. And currently, we are very limited to how much filtered airflow we have. So the long-term fix is to install a new filtered ventilation system, or the safety significant confinement ventilation system, which will increase the underground airflow by a factor of 4. Now, this Sscbs system will also work in conjunction with the new utility shaft, which is an air intake shaft, to be able to provide the higher capacity airflows that we need. Now, these systems, as I indicated earlier, will not be online until the 2025 timeframe. So in the interim, in order to increase the airflow, we are in the process of bringing on the legacy 700C fan, which was one of the fans previously used to move air in the underground. Now, this system does function unfiltered, and so we will be able to only operate it when we are doing non-emplacement activities. Now, in contrast, the Sscbs will allow simultaneous mining, rock bolting, and emplacement work in the underground because it is a fully filtered system. Next slide, please. So we've had several previous meetings regarding the 700C legacy fan. So this fan does operate in an unfiltered mode. Okay, but by operating it, we will be able to increase the airflow, which not only increases the comfort levels to our workforce, it also will remove exhaust from the equipment in the underground, and make sure that we're able to ensure the continued safety of our workforce. Now, we have, as part of that process, we took a phased approach to getting it restarted. So after more than a year of technical analysis and evaluation, we completed a 4-hour startup test at the end of January. This test was very successful. All the environmental data that we received shows that there was no impact to human health or the environment. We were approximately 5,000 times below EPA's NESHAP limits, and the data is essentially at the background level. The next step that was completed was the air balancing. And so we operated the 700C fan at the end of October and into early November for almost 40 hours intermittently to make sure that we can get those airflows balanced in preparation for routine operations. The data that we have evaluated, I believe it was actually has been completed now. It continues to support the initial data that we received with regard to that 4-hour test. And so we are still well below the NESHAP's limits. Data is consistent with what we would expect for background levels from any type of emissions coming from the face of the fan. Now, we do anticipate posting the next set of reports that we will be receiving on that fan. So that there will be one report that comes strictly from the radiological data, and then in next few months there will be some additional lab data that is being provided. Based on the analysis, we are planning on moving forward into routine operations in the next week or so. And as I indicated, this will only be for ground control and mining activities. Now, this interim step is still limits operations. This will continue until we're able to bring Sscbs and the utility shaft online. So next slide, please. So the Sscbs system is going to significantly increase the airflow in the underground. Here you can see from the illustrations that we have the air coming up out of the underground. It is run then through a salt reduction building, i.e. We essentially knock the salt out of the air and then are able to continue to move the air through a series of HEPA filter banks before it is released through the exhaust shaft stack. And so there are the two primary buildings that we'll be talking about here in the next two slides, the one for the salt reduction building, and then the new filter building, which will house the HEPA filters. Next slide. So here, the critical path items or major items that we will complete in calendar year 22 will include completion of the new filter building and the structure, as well as installing the HEPA filters and installing the exhaust fans. Now, some of the additional key performance parameters include completion of the salt reduction building, new filter building being complete, and construction being complete. We do anticipate that construction could be completed as early as mid-2023, but it may take a little bit longer. Right now, progress is very good, and that project is moving right along. Next slide, please. Just a series of pictures. Here you can see the groundbreaking activities that began in 2018. Next slide. Here they've got some illustrations of the groundwork and utility work that's going on, and as they're prepping for some of the slabs. Next slide. Here in the top photo, you can see the slab for the salt reduction building has been poured, and they are in the process of pouring the corners for that facility as well. And they've also to the right side of that top facility, you can see the work in preparation for pouring the slab for the new filter building. The photos that are across the bottom are some of the additional concrete work that was been done for those facilities since that time. Next slide. So here in the foreground, you can see, or in the top photo, you can see some of the poured walls that are being installed for the new filter building. And then down, the pictures down across the bottom are photos of the salt reduction building. So you can see the concrete walls are up, the posts providing support are up, as well as the roof panels. Next slide, please. As I indicated, this project is moving right along. So we did complete the slab on grade concrete placements in August. We put some of the 50 of the cast in place concrete walls at the end of October. We've received all of the HEPA filter units that will then also be installed in the new filter building. Next slide. Again, just another shot of the poured walls. You can see the amount of rebar that we have to ensure that that facility meets our safety basis needs. Next slide. Here's an internal shot of the salt reduction building. So pretty successful activity for us. We have received the salt reduction units on site. And so we'll begin the process of getting equipment installed shortly. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the new air intake shaft, or the utility shaft. Shaft sinking was suspended approximately a year ago, but there were some activities that we were able to complete. Next slide. So accomplishments so far on this project is the construction of the salt pond and salt pile associated with this facility, installing the power feeds and fire loop for the facility, as well as installing and putting into service the north access bypass roads. Now, we've also done some work which includes installing some of the duct work and ensuring the temporary concrete lining of the shaft itself were completed. Currently, our contractor, NWP, is in the process of remobilizing the miners so that we can resume sinking of the shaft. Next slide, please. This is due to receiving New Mexico approval for the permit modification to our hazardous waste facility permit. We're very appreciative of that. And that is our basis for resuming shaft sinking. We do have one other permit that we are in the process of modifying, and as our groundwater discharge permit, or our DP 831 permit. We do anticipate a decision by New Mexico around the January timeframe. Next photo. Here are some photos of the ductwork that is being installed that will allow the air to be pumped into the underground directly into the utility shaft. Next slide. In addition to these two major projects. We also have a variety of other smaller infrastructure work activities. Here you see a picture of the salt hoist wheel changeout activities that were going on. So we replaced our salt hoist wheel. Well, we also refurbished the actual structure for that as well. Next slide. In the background, you can see this work in progress. And so we have, since this time, completed sealing and painting that structure. And you can see in the foreground, the new salt chute waiting to be installed to replace the one that is in the background of the picture to the left. Next slide, please. We're continuing other recapitalization efforts. One of the more significant ones is the fire suppression system on site. So we have completed construction of some new fire water tanks, are in the process of completing a pump house. We have installed significant portions of a new fire loop, and we will start tying those fire loops into our existing buildings in the next year. Next slide, please. Salt in the underground and electrical equipment does not get along very well. And so that salt environment is very aggressively eroding or attacking our electrical system. So we do have new systems that have been installed in the underground. We're continuing to do more electrical upgrades on the surface. And we expect to expand the capabilities in the underground to support all of our equipment that we are trying to transition to be all electrical. Next slide. Here's a photo of some of the new airlines that were recently installed on site. Next slide, as well as new air compressors. Next slide. Currently, there are 17 fully or partially electric vehicles and mobile equipment in the underground. We do have 12 more that have been purchased and are beginning to arrive shortly, and we intend to have them in service by the end of this calendar year 22. Next slide. One of the things that I really haven't talked about is the difference between contact handled and remote handled waste. The bulk of the waste we currently receive is contact handled. We are receiving small quantities of remote handled waste. However, they are in heavily shielded containers, and so we manage them as if they are contact handled. We have not received and emplaced RH waste in boreholes since 2014. And so we are currently undergoing the process to prepare for borehole emplacement. Now, a borehole is essentially a tube we drill into the side of the salt into the rooms where we emplace the CH waste, and then we load remote handled waste into those boreholes horizontally. And so it will take us roughly 3 years to go through that process to prepare and eventually begin borehole emplacement again. Next slide. In order to wrap up here, just a couple points I'd like to make. I mentioned it a couple times throughout our presentation, but we did recently achieve a very, very important milestone, and that was the receipt of our 13,000th shipment of transuranic waste on November 11th. This is due in no part to the hard work and effort of our workforce, as well as the support of our various stakeholders. We will continue to ensure that our workforce operates to the highest safety standards. We need to very much recognize NWP in being able to regain and maintain DOE's premier award and recognition for safety, and that is the VPP, Voluntary Protection Program. They have achieved STAR status and are continuing to maintain that. The reason that this is such a premier program is because it's not a top-down driven safety program. It's from the worker up to make sure that they are taking personal ownership of safety and ensuring that it's fully integrated in all the day-to-day activities. So looking forward to several more years of premier safety. That being said, we could not do it without the support of our state, our regulators, and most especially our local community. We very much appreciate the positive support they provide us, and we look forward to being able to continue to work with and partner with them as we move forward into the future. Okay, next slide, please.
So at this time, we will take questions. I did want to mention that the recording of this meeting will be available on the Wipp website early next week. So that we can if you have questions, we ask that you please submit to the chat. We did have one question. On the opening slide, those FY21 accomplishments.
Those would be FY21 accomplishments.
We have another one. Is the Nepa, you mentioned the EIS for the surplus plutonium that NNSA announced in December 2020 or something else?
So the Nepa analysis that I was speaking to is particular to Wipp, and we'll take a look at the volume projections into the future and what will happen for waste disposal, transuranic waste disposal for waste that would be beyond panel 12.
And another question, why will it take 3+ years to resume RH waste and placement in disposal room walls?
So with regard to the RH waste and placement, there are a series of activities that need to occur. First and foremost is we need to bring a core group of personnel back on site to be able to support the engineering and planning work for that work activities. So activities such as evaluating the existing equipment, determining whether it needs to be replaced or repaired or upgraded. That takes a bit of work. Additionally, we are planning to build mock-ups for training purposes. So that work is beginning right now, so that we can get our workers used to some of the equipment that will get used in the underground for waste and placement activities. Additionally, we'll have to go through quite a bit of work package development, the procedures that the operators will use. And part of the reason we have to bring the workforce in now is that they participate in the development and troubleshooting of the procedures. Once that work is completed and we've determined that the workforce is ready and the facilities are ready, then we'll need to go through the process of a formal readiness acceptance. And so The contractor will formally go through the readiness evaluation. DOE will evaluate what level of readiness assessment will continue from that perspective as well. And this will allow us to ensure that when we actually begin RH waste emplacement, that we're able to do so safely and compliantly. Readiness assessments for this type of activity easily can take 3 to 6 months by themselves. We certainly would expect there to be improvements that get made. And so it's not unreasonable to say, 3 to 4 years is what it would take for us to be ready to resume routine borehole emplacement activities. That being said, in the interim, we have some additional shielded containers that are going through final NRC review, and we anticipate being able to increase the type of RH waste we can place as contact handled waste so that we can meet the needs of the generator sites.
Thank you, Reinhardt. And an additional one. NNSA intends to ship downblended surplus plutonium from Savannah River Site to Wipp as true waste, meeting waste acceptance criteria. What changes to Wipp operations will be needed to accept this waste stream?
So fundamentally, the intent is not to have a direct impact on the processes we use with regard to waste emplacement for this type of material. Primarily, I'll say the changes I anticipate would be more from a monitoring perspective, from a safeguards and security, than any type of handling activities.
Okay. The June 9th, 2017 plan change request for the new filter building stated the construction would be completed in calendar year 2020. Why was the schedule missed so badly?
There were a variety of different impacts to that schedule. So one of the expectations the department has is associated with the quality aspects of the construction. Because this is a safety significant system, we have very specific NQA1 requirements that have to be demonstrated and achieved during the construction process. This was an area that we were not able to successfully leverage early on. As a result, there were some design changes that needed to be made because there were not vendors able to construct some of the panels and structures that we needed. Additionally, the implementing contractor needed to place additional attention on those QA requirements in the execution of the field work. That being said, we've worked through all of those issues. The current subcontractor executing the work has been able to demonstrate that they are able to execute the work consistent with the department's expectations for NQA1 compliance. And as a result, you see a significant level of performance as they are moving through the execution of the project right now.
Okay. And in the 10-year schedule, when will workers in the underground not use personal protective equipment and respirators?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
You bet. In your 10-year schedule, when will workers in the underground not use personal protective equipment and respirators?
I assume the question pertains to the PPE for entering radiological areas. Obviously, in the underground, there's always safety-related PPE, such as hard hats, safety glasses, leather gloves, safety shoes, etc., and those will always continue to be required. But the question specifically will tie to the bulk of the work associated in panel 7. So as we complete the work in panel 7 and migrate out of the area, the bulk of the radiological PPE will no longer be necessary. But there will still be some portions of the mine that may require PPE depending on the vent path that we have in the future. Sean, let me just, Sean, I've got that right. Okay. Thank you. Make sure I didn't misspeak.
And Reinhard, you're being asked when you were referring to the 700C fan, they want to make sure they heard you say that in the next week or so, it will begin routine operation. And then they understood you to say that 2 reports were being prepared, one for radionuclides, the other for lab data. Please describe the reports in more detail.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and let Tim respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Reinhard. The reports are developed concurrently. The data is collected during that last test for the 40-hour run. There is on-site radiological data that's collected and analyzed for workers at the site. So that's basically under the 10 CFR 835 requirements for protection of radiological workers. That data is completed and analyzed and counted, and very good outcome of that. As with the 4-hour test, it is also combined with the environmental monitoring related to NESHAPs and the EPA requirements, and that is the collection of the discharge of the fan face. That data requires compositing because the activity is so low. That composite is done at the Wipp labs here in Carlsbad and then counted in a prolonged counting process. And that data does take longer due to that process. That's what will be the second part of the results. Those will be published and combined together, and it will match or mirror the way that the 4-hour test was presented. So, you know, everyone in the public, the workers, and the decision makers will be able to see a apples to apples comparison. Does the data support the conclusions that were drawn after the 4-hour test? And in fact, so far they are matching very closely. So it looks like the process that we used in the decision making is accurate, and those will be finished up here shortly.
Thank you, Tim. Another statement and question. We appreciate the update, but as you said, it has been one and a half years since the last one. Does DOE intend to provide these kinds of quality updates on a more frequent basis?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, we're hoping that the next public meeting that we have, we're actually able to continue not only the virtual aspects of it, but also be able to have members of the public be able to interact with us directly in the facility where we do this. We look to move or migrate out of the DOE building in Carlsbad to different areas in our communities so that we can interact more closely with the folks in Carlsbad, Hobbs, etc.
Has there ever been radiological decon needed? Has there ever been radiological decon needed for exiting from work in panel 7?
I will turn that over to somebody from NWP.
As I'm going to assume that the question is related to personal or personnel decontamination, and there's only been one personal decontamination effort that was required to my knowledge. I've only been here for the past 3 years, and that was actually after the event that occurred in the underground. Since then, there have been no issues with personal becoming contaminated or needing to be decontaminated.
Okay, Tim, we'll leave it with you. This is a follow-up for you, Tim. How is it that the 700C fan will be put in operation before the reports have been finalized? Especially the RAD NESHAP's annual report that must be submitted to EPA for review.
I don't believe we committed that the fan would actually be started till the reports have been reviewed. We're going to run very tightly together. We met on this actually today. We have preliminary data, but like Mr. Pernell referred to, quality assurance is a cornerstone of our program. So even though we've seen the data and we've seen the results of a lot of the data, we still go through a quality review process. So I'm not certain that we committed that we would be starting the fan prior to the review of that information.
So let me provide just a little clarification to that. So the process that Tim is talking about is the technical evaluation of the data. Given that the data is consistent with the original data taken during the 4-hour test, and there's been no anomalies associated with it, and because that data is approximately 5,000 times below the NESHAP levels, the approval process will be based on that evaluation while the reports are being finalized. And as Tim indicated, the on-site report, which is the primary report that we need with regard to resuming 700C operations, that analysis has been done. It just hasn't been combined with the laboratory work that is being performed and will take several more weeks.
Okay, and in July 2020, the DNFSB reported that waste emplacement was paused because of a walk down of waste handlers and union representatives. Please provide some detail about what happened and why floor conditions weren't resolved sooner.
So let me kind of start the conversation, then I'll turn it over to Mark Piercy to finish discussing. But from the department's expectations, taking a safety pause, whether it be by a worker or supervisor or management, when they don't feel comfortable with the safety posture of a particular activity, is exactly what we want. So, kudos to the worker for taking that time out, because he wanted to make sure that the work activities were being done in a safe, compliant manner. And, and kudos for NWP for listening to that worker and making sure his concerns were addressed prior to resuming any kind of waste emplacement activities in panel 7. That's exactly what we would expect to occur. Mark, I don't know if you want to provide more specifics or anything.
Well, I sure can, Ryan. The workforce, both waste handling and mine operations, talk routinely on point of fact every day. And we have a ever-changing area in panel 7. It's been open for an extended period of time. And ground control efforts in there are not routine as they would have been in the past. And cracks in the floor develop overnight, or they're found just prior to a given evolution. And we experienced a series of those events. And when the work pause was announced, we were already actively pursuing the correction of those items. It allowed us then to get the entire group of waste handlers to appreciate what the mine operations team was doing on their behalf, and allowed us to increase and do better communication between those groups. So there wasn't any miscommunication on one group not meeting the other group's expectations. So you are correct. We applaud the workforce for bringing that to management's attention and allowing us to work with them to correct and work through all of those issues. But it is an ever-changing environment, and that was the root of the issue.
Thank you, Mark. CCNS strongly advises that the 700C fan not be started until after the 2 reports are finalized. What DOE order allows for the operation to restart before the final reports are QA/QC'd?
If I may, the approval to run the 700C is already present. Obviously, we have run it through 2 campaigns. There was nothing abnormal in any of the campaigns that would call for a stop or a stop work or a cease activity. That would be in concurrence with the DOE's oversight prerogative. With that being said, what will happen now going forward is a continuation of that start approval. We modified the DSA. It went through a very rigorous review. So the documented safety analysis currently says, we can operate the fan. The monitoring capabilities, the discharge monitoring, Station A, underground cams, they're all in place. They're all functional. And right now we could resume the operation of the fan. What we're really, working towards is some permanent power supplies to some of the samplers that we're running off of generators, some permanent attachment points to the fan face. Previously, until we saw these results, we had temporary installations, and now with the results supporting our conclusions, we can make this a more permanent operation. So we never were under a stop work or a hold. This was imposed internally, not by a DOE order.
So to follow on with that, NWP went through the formal process for doing readiness assessment. The department conducted oversight and review of that readiness assessment process, and then consistent with the DOE order associated with startup activities. They essentially declared readiness and were able to start up, which is what the underground air balancing activity was. That was the first startup of the routine operation, so to speak. So that's the process that authorized it. The additional analysis that's being done is confirmatory. We want to make sure that we're able to demonstrate there's no changes in conditions or expectations. So from that perspective, we're consistent with DOE's requirements and expectations.
And if RADCON has not been needed for almost 6 years after the 2014 incident, why is panel 7 still designated as a contaminated area? Doesn't the requirement for respiratory protection when in panel 7 make work more dangerous? Why not relax the radiological protection level if there is no possibility of contamination resuspension?
So it's a very interesting question. It's something we've had a lot of internal discussion. Certainly those controls were put in place several years ago, primarily to ensure that we were being protective of the workforce. That workforce now has several years of operating experience under their belt. and have become very efficient in being able to operate with those controls in place. And so, I believe that given that Panel 7 work activities are only going to continue, for another 6 to 9 months, I don't know that it's worth the effort at this point to go through and change the work control packages, retrain people, to reduce that level of protection for the workforce. Certainly, the point that's being made, is, are we not making it more dangerous? I don't know that that's the case. I think that the rigor in which controls are implemented continue to ensure protectiveness of the workforce. I think that part of the consideration needs to take into account what the workforce desires. And right now, there's really not a direct operational impact that would warrant making a change at this point in the game. Had we looked at this a little more closely, maybe 2 years ago, would be a different answer. Sean, I don't know if you have a different thought along those lines.
No, I agree with what you said. This is somewhat of a legacy where we're at. To Reinhardt's point, with where we're at Panel 7, the time that we have remaining for operations in Panel 7, it is going to be retraining, the changing of the procedures to downpost that area. The benefit is not there at this point in time. I also agree that, as the question implied, or I disagree with it, as the question implied, that it's more dangerous today to have them in those conservative controls. They have become extremely proficient at those controls and have become accustomed to them while they're operating in Panel 7.
Are there any more questions? When do you expect an announcement of the new M&O contract?
That's an excellent question. I get asked that all the time, not only by NWP, but also by members of the community. Unfortunately, that's not something the department can comment on. We're in the middle of the procurement process. As the department gets closer to making an award, announcements will be formally made through the Sscbs, who is the portion of DOE that is handling the procurement process for us. And so, fortunately, I can't provide any information on that.
Are there any more questions? Has rebalancing of the Sscbs been completed? What is the expected total cost? I'm sorry, rebaselining of the SSCBS been completed? What is the total expected cost?
So we are in the final processes for completing that rebaselining activity. We've had several briefings and interim approvals up at headquarters on that activity. The final question that we're working through is whether or not the contingency we have in place is sufficient. And so we anticipate that we will be in a position to get final approval within the next several weeks if we're able to get the meetings scheduled prior to the winter holiday season. If we are not able to get the meeting schedule, it'll get pushed into the beginning of the calendar year. Once that's done, we'll be able to provide some detail on what the increased cost is.
Will Wipp be closed over the winter holidays? If so, what are the expected dates Wipp will be closed?
Wipp doesn't close. We will have people on site 24/7, 365 days a year. We will not be in the underground or be performing waste handling or shipment acceptance over the holidays. And that's a function of our workforce taking some well-earned vacations, as well as the generator sites availing themselves of the same, and some restrictions to shipping over those holidays. So Wipp will not close or shut down.
And Mark, there's a follow-up to that. What are the dates? I'm not exactly sure what dates they would be referring to.
Well, the underground, we won't have people in on Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day or New Year's Day because of the national holidays and the lack of those workers being there.
What about from a shipping perspective? Do we know what dates we won't be shipping over the holidays?
The restrictions are to have the shipments off the roads a certain period of time before the actual holiday. I don't have that particular time frame in mind, but typically it's 24 to 48 hours before the holiday. We want to get the shipments off of the busy areas where they're put more at risk.
Is there a maintenance pause scheduled early 2022?
We try to schedule a maintenance outage every quarter. Some are more complex than others. The major complex outage we are planning for late fiscal year 22 or early fiscal year 23. But we are planning some outages every quarter for certain maintenance activities. And as Reinhard showed in the slides, we have a number of general plant projects and plant infrastructure upgrades that require us to have outages to bring them online and integrate them with the rest of the site.
Any other questions? Will there be a public comment period for the upcoming NEPA process?
Yes, we will follow all applicable regulations pertaining to public engagement and involvement in the upcoming NEPA process.
It looks like a clarification to the question on dates. Historically, WIP operations are minimal for 2 weeks around Christmas. I was wondering about those dates. I might venture that December 20th to January 3rd. Would I be correct?
Joni, you are correct. That's traditionally the time frame where we have the largest number of our employees who are taking vacations and enjoying themselves over the holidays. And we will not do as much during that time period while the workforce is enjoying their holiday as we normally would. But for those who continue to come to work, we will continue to perform our maintenance and whatever activities we have the right number of people to support.
Let me ask Ken. I seem to recall from our 8-week rolling schedules that we may have a shipment or two that will occur after December 20th. Maybe
Right now, on our 8-week planning schedule, we're showing 5 shipments, the time period that Joni had up there.
so significantly reduced, but not all stop. Correct.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
The most recent NEPA supplemental analysis did not include public comment. Are you preparing something other than the supplemental analysis?
Yes, that's the intent. I'll say currently we're anticipating that it'll be a supplemental environmental impact statement. But the formal process will be a notification through the Federal Register, at which point we will move towards scoping discussions with the local community and stakeholders. So more to come on that. I want to make sure that I'm not being pre-decisional in stating what's going to occur till we get through the formal notification process.
Are there any other questions? Last time, are there any other questions? Okay, so not seeing any other questions, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you for taking the time to attend this meeting with us tonight. And as I mentioned, this meeting will be posted to the recording of this meeting will be made available on the WIP website early next week. Thank you very much and have a great evening.